The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
We are those guys. We hope to be your guys, bringing you the latest. Again, continuing our conversation about the NFL schedule release, knowing full well that while taking a look at the big picture, the week the schedule came out, here we are now, Nick. We've had some time to digest, and there are some matchups particularly that pique our interest. And I guess we should probably dive in after we say, what's going on, Nick Ferguson?
Hey, Alex Hardy, what's going on?
I'm trying to figure out how cute I want to be, because when we talk about game-to-game matchups, right, we talked about the teams that that are just kind of presumed to be winning a lot versus the ones that aren't, and kind of how some schedules shook out with travel. If you missed that previous episode, make sure to catch it right here. Those guys, Ride the Wave Media, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, YouTube, for our most recent episode. But today, the thought process is, let's put some quarterbacks mano-a-mano. Let's get some reunions. Let's talk about rematches of playoff games from a year ago. Particular matchups that Nick Ferguson, you have circled on the calendar with this NFL schedule fully out and available. So I'll start with you, Nick. I think we have 4 matchups each, so we're going to talk 8 games in total, where we are just intrigued with what it looks like on paper, knowing we've got a long way to get to the regular season. So, Nick, I'll tee you up the first game that you have circled on the NFL calendar from a matchup perspective.
The first game, it is Washington versus the Bears. It's a Week 8 matchup between Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. But by this point in the season, Week 8, we should have some kind of idea of what direction both organizations are going down. And it would have given either player, Daniels or Caleb Williams, an opportunity to kind of get their feet wet. So they're going to have their butts and bruises along the way. But the guy that went 1 and 2, we get a chance to see them in Week 8.
So Week 8, we can presume, well, Caleb Williams, already named the Week 1 starter, which is absurd considering they haven't played any organized football, whatsoever. But that's the approach that this team is taking with their number 1 overall pick. Week 8, you'd think that Jaden Daniels is ready to roll, fully entrenched if he doesn't win that job over Marcus Mariota in the summer. So what kind of rust do you think or, experience these rookies can gain so that they may be starting to click come Week 8, as opposed to, let's say we saw the number 1 and the number 2 overall pick duking it out Week 1 or Week 2?
Well, the biggest thing is, once again, look at when this match actually takes place. We're talking about Week 8. So obviously, like you said, Matt Eberflus has already jumped down and said, well, Caleb Williams is our starter. You take a guy number 1 overall, you figure that's going to happen. Now with Jaden Daniels, obviously you have a veteran in Marcus Mariota, like you mentioned, but at that point of the season, you're 8 games in, right? So Scott Peters and Dan Quinn should have somewhat of an idea of what direction that they're going in. If Mariota's named the starter and things are not going great, at that point, you can go and use Jaden Daniels. You get an 8-game, 9-game sample size of what he could be as you roll into 2025. And I'll say this, I haven't looked at the odds yet, the Vegas odds, but I would give the nod to Caleb Williams simply because I believe that he has a better overall offensive supporting cast around him than Jaden Daniels. But great to see those 2 quarterbacks who we don't know this yet, but the future of the NFL from a franchise standpoint rests on the shoulders of those 2 quarterbacks. So we're getting a chance to see them play, and you see which guy is a little more superior than the other.
Yeah, just one head-to-head matchup. I mean, Bryce Young did beat CJ Stroud when they met last year. Does that mean Bryce Young is the better quarterback based on one performance, or is it just about seeing what these 2 teams have built around their rookie signal callers halfway through the season?
It's basically seeing how that particular player plays, because every single year and every single matchup as we go through, we're going to say, it's the battle of the quarterbacks. It's entirely, no, it's not. They're just 2 guys who are under center. It's about which quarterback has the better supporting cast and the best team. And listen, there was a lot of talk between the Carolina Panthers and the Houston Texans, who was going to go number one overall, but it gave Bryce Young, who didn't really have anything of that much to root up for in 2023, it gave him something to celebrate. Let's be totally honest. You went out and beat CJ Stroud, a team that was right there on the precipice, playing in Baltimore, knocking on the door, but they fell short. But to say that, you know what, as crazy as last year was, I beat you. So that gives you a little bragging rights.
Well, I would like to move on to my first game that may involve a rookie quarterback, but this is week 2. The San Francisco 49ers, after hosting Aaron Rodgers and the Jets in week 1 for Monday night, they've got the short turnaround and travel to go to Minnesota. We have the Kevin O'Connell versus Kyle Shanahan matchup, the Jedi Master versus the Padawan, right? To give you a reference you appreciate. Hey, you know what? Sam Darnold was with the 49ers a year ago. You have familiarity there. And I'm curious if it's Darnold starting or J.J. McCarthy. In my opinion, the 10th overall pick with a Brock Purdy skill set, we're not sure which quarterback we get from Minnesota, but we have the Kevin O'Connell pupil, the first up against Kyle Shanahan. I'm not quite going to count Robert Saleh on the defensive side of the football, though he served under Shanahan and you coached with them in San Francisco. So a meeting of the minds. You've got O'Connell versus Shanahan week 2, Nick.
Well, I'm going to give the nod to Kyle Shanahan.
Of course. They're the better football team.
Yeah, the master and apprentice, because let's not forget, even though Kevin O'Connell was the head coach in his league, he was the quarterback's coach and the pseudo offensive coordinator under Sean McVay with the Rams. But Kyle has been at this for a while. Could you imagine? Hey, you have somewhat of an apprentice trying to run the same scheme that you're running, but you've run it more than he has. And oh, by the way, one of the guys who the architect of the offense is your father, right? You get the whole come back to Star Wars. Luke, I am your father.
Yeah.
That's the kind of whole thing. And then you talk about Sam Darnold. Yes, he was with the 49ers. Did he play? Absolutely not, because of Brock Purdy. So it's week 2. So you have to figure, okay, well, how far along would J.J. McCarthy actually be? So I'm thinking Sam Darnold being the elder statesman, knowing the offense, because it's a similar type offense. He's going to be the guy playing against Brock Purdy. So that's going to be the narrative. It's not going to be about Kyle and O'Donnell. It's going to be Purdy versus Sam Darnold. And that's going to be really interesting to see, because Brian Flores, their defensive coordinator, I mean, he is a hell of a coach, but to see him match wits with that of Kyle Shanahan, that's going to be interesting to watch.
And the last piece of trivia I have for you, Nick, regarding this game, the last time the 49ers won in Minneapolis was 1992. Steve Young getting the victory for San Francisco. Who was the Vikings quarterback in 92 when they lost to the 49ers?
When they lost to the 49ers, the Vikings coach?
Yeah, the Vikings have won 7 straight at home against Minnesota.
I don't know.
Coach Denny Green and his quarterback, former NFL MVP, Rich Gannon, which moves me to my favorite, I think, of the 4 games that I've picked. I think we'll do a little snake draft here. I'm just going to go right ahead and march on. Week 5. So I'm hitting the fast forward button a little bit. We've got the Cowboys hosting the Steelers on Sunday Night Football. You've got 2 of the most storied franchises. They met in the Super Bowl 3 times. Pittsburgh beat Dallas twice for half of their 4 championships in those 70s with the Steel Curtain. And then Dallas beat Pittsburgh in Super Bowl 30, which was also the last time Dallas got out of the divisional round of the playoffs. So assuming it's your guy, Russell Wilson, for Pittsburgh, he's 3-1 all time against Dak Prescott. The last time that Dak beat Russ was in the 2018 wildcard game when Russ was with Seattle. However, Russell's got the better stats: 9 TDs, 0 picks, and 4 starts against Dallas, where Dak has 6 interceptions in those 4 games. So clearly you've got both teams at a crossroads. Russell Wilson in a brand new scenery. But as we've seen with his history, he's had the ability to step it up when playing the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, he definitely has. And here's the thing. This matchup comes down to who has the better supporting cast. when you look at the Dallas Cowboys, Micah Parsons has been a monster. But as Dan Quinn found out himself, I can't line him up every single play on all three levels and have a level of success. And let's talk, you say this game is week 4?
Week 5.
Week 5. Are you saying that CeeDee Lamb has reported to camp? We don't even know what's going to happen by that time. He wants a new contract. So if CeeDee Lamb is there, it makes things that much easier for Dak Prescott. But if he's not there, it's even tougher because who has a better defense, the Steelers or the Cowboys? And I'm going to lean towards the Steelers. And
yeah, Pittsburgh.
We don't know, will Russ be the starting quarterback? To me, it doesn't make a difference because if Justin Fields is the starting quarterback, both of those guys possess the same skill set. One's younger and one's just a little older. It's almost like a used car and a new car.
Right. And you have familiarity with both of these play callers. The Cowboys have Brian Schottenheimer, who took over for Kellen Moore. Meanwhile, Arthur Smith steps in after his tenure with the Atlanta Falcons. These are both guys that want to run the football. They just have to have the personnel to match. The Steelers moving heaven and earth to add offensive linemen in the draft and an emphasis on that running game. Also trading Deontay Johnson, their top receiver. This team is telegraphed, we want to run the football. And the Dallas Cowboys, I think based on having no pass catchers outside of CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks, we want to run the football. And Zeke is back for his swan song after leading my New England Patriots in rushing yards last year.
Wait, come on now. Well, that's not hard to say, leading your New England Patriots in rushing yards.
Yes.
Because look, even though Zeke seems to still be a very reliable, right? I use that word very loosely, reliable running back.
3 yards in a cloud of dust. That's what we guess.
Harris. When you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, that's how that franchise has been built on doing two things and doing two things well: running the ball and stopping the run. So if you're suggesting that somehow, right, Jerry Jones is going to be able to move heaven and earth and Zeke is going to have a great day on the ground, I'm going to say no. That's not.
Well, it's one of 6 primetime games that the Dallas Cowboys have. Nick, I believe next up for you, you've got a game not quite in primetime, but an exciting divisional matchup nonetheless.
Yeah, you know what? Let me see what direction I want to go, but I'm going to go week 7, NFC East, Giants versus the Eagles. And the reason I love this matchup is because these two cities, they hate each other. They hate each other. Every sports team, hockey, baseball, they hate each other. But the hate was only inspired more by the idea of Saquon Barkley going and joining the division rivals and his back and forth on social media with Tiki Barber.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
So that only is going to add to the energy of this game. But we know when we look at, Philadelphia, they lost DeAndre Swift to Chicago. And now you got Saquon Barkley, a guy who carried the Giants. He carried them by himself, literally.
The face of that team. Without, granted, we're seeing Daniel Jones with those tan pants and the new uniforms, but Saquon Barkley was that franchise. Yes, and they cast them astray because of positional value. Insane.
And listen, I can tell you this. Like, it's great when someone passes on you. It's even better when it's someone that you were so thankful for them drafting you. Now you go to another team who's a rival in their backyard and you get a chance to force feed it down their throat. See, This is one of those games I really love to watch because I know you look at the AFC North as being black and blue division, but no. This game is going to be the black and blue game between the Giants and the Eagles.
Now, I've got notes for both. One, Nick, I want to congratulate you and tell you well done, because again, the division matchups, you got 2 of them, but this week 7 matchup, yes, it's Saquon Barkley going back to MetLife, but also the next time they meet is week 18, when we already know the Giants are out of contention. I won't say that the Eagles are going to run away with the division like they did 2 years ago, but what I've said on this podcast, and I'll reiterate it here, is that Drew Lock is going to be the Giants' starting quarterback by the time we get to week 18. We talked about this with Russell Wilson's example. For a guy that's never been injured, Sean Payton benched Russell Wilson because of the injury guarantees. The New York Giants can get out from the Daniel Jones contract unless he gets injured this season because he's got 2 years worth of injury guarantees. So we get to a certain point and we figure out that this Giants team isn't going anywhere, or even worse, they're 500 and picking 12th or 13th overall. Daniel Jones is going to be riding that pine, and your guy Drew Lock is going to have to step in, if not for some Tommy DeVito nonsense we get again. But the week 7 matchup is the juicier one, even though the NFL prides themselves on putting those divisional matchups at the end of the season. And yeah, I just think it's kind of the put up or shut up time for the Giants. If they can't beat Saquon or those Eagles in week 7, we may see Drew Lock sooner than we expect. Because again, if we're going to bench Russell Wilson, who's never had a significant injury, what do you think the Giants are going to do knowing his long injury history and the type of guaranteed money Daniel Jones would be given compared to, wiping themselves clean? We're also going to get my second point on this. We're also going to see a Malik Neighbors matchup with a pair of defensive back rookies that the Eagles selected in Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So it'll be interesting to see how the Eagles, by week 7 now, deploy those rookies into one of the league's worst secondaries, where you've got the veteran experience pieces on the outside, adding 2 rookies into the formula. It'll be interesting to see how the Giants combat that with Neighbors and not a whole lot of weapons otherwise. Although just shout out Devin Singletary. You go ahead.
Well, I'll say this. Here's how the Eagles are going to really slow down Neighbors. Because let's be totally honest. Who do they have on the wide receiver front that is a real threat? Neighbors is just going to be a rookie wide receiver. And you need multiple threats to really make it difficult on the defense. And even though I know Philly's going to have some young, corners, Darius Slay is still there. That defense that they drafted, all those guys from the University of Georgia, are still there. So that's way that whether it's Daniel Jones or Drew Lock, this is the way that you slow those guys down, being able to put a lot of pressure on that quarterback, speeding up that clock, even if Neighbors is open.
Yeah.
Get it to him.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give the early nod to the Philadelphia Eagles over the Giants.
Of course. And at 6 foot, 200 pounds, Malik Neighbors is a Goliath compared to the 4 or 5 tiny slot guys. You mentioned Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, Isaiah McKenzie. Oh, but hey, they did just add Allen Robinson into the fold. So that Giants offense, my goodness. I think you've got another pick that you can make, Nick, with your best matchups looking head to head for the 2024 schedule.
Yeah, another one I really love, because I love watching guys face off against their former teams. Kirk Cousins against the Vikings in week 14.
Yes. Shout out our first, the first team that we've both mentioned are the Minnesota Vikings. Shocker. I'm genuinely a shocker.
Yeah. Now, listen, really quickly, this is going out there on the limb. I know the Falcons and Terry Fontenot, screwed up the draft or shocked everyone by taking Penix. Do you think by this time in week 14, could Penix be the starter?
Kirk Cousins could get injured. Now, this is why it's hard to crown paper champs, because you can't account for injuries. Now, are you saying he could take the job from a healthy Kirk Cousins? Is that what we're asking?
No, I'm saying that it could be an injury that derails Kirk Cousins' season, that puts him out and kind of forces, Raheem Morris to go with Michael Penix.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting, because then you had I sense a theme here, because you had the number 1 and the number 2 picks with your first matchup. And now you're looking to more rookie quarterbacks come week 14 as a possibility. So, you've obviously have Kirk Cousins against his former team in Minnesota. And beyond that, Raheem Morris and Kevin O'Connell, as you said, both under Sean McVay in LA. There's a lot of familiarity with these teams. And by week 14, we're going to understand the play caller for Atlanta, Zach Robinson's identity in his first opportunity calling plays. So I'm fascinated. Of course, by week 14, you hope we have everything kind of shaken out because, correct me if I'm wrong, week 14 was kind of a healthy scratch game for Bijan Robinson, more or less, or he played a handful of snaps and Arthur Smith sat him with a migraine. It was kind of bizarre. And the mystery surrounding this team, I'm hoping, dissipates when we see come week 14 against the Vikings. We know how the Falcons can utilize Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier in the backfield. The pass catchers in Drake London, Kyle Pitts, coming over from Chicago.
Who?
Why is his name escaping me? Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney.
Yeah.
So, look, you've got weapons on that side. You have Jefferson, Addison, a healthy TJ Hawkinson, right? We won't see him week 2 when I brought up the Niners game. You've got weapons all over the place, whether it be Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix, Sam Darnold, or JJ McCarthy. We could have an exciting matchup if both of these offenses know how to get all of those pieces involved. Meanwhile, you have 2 rebuilding defenses. I'm just going to, think about this matchup. This could be one of the highest scoring games in the NFL season.
Wait, you really think so? Because once again, now we're still talking about, is it Darnold or is it JJ McCarthy? Because if it's Darnold, they may stand a chance because Aaron Jones is the running back. And you talked about, Jefferson and Addison. You have an opportunity. But if it's Mike McCarthy, it's not Mike McCarthy, but JJ McCarthy, then it makes things a little more difficult as far as a rookie. And then here's another thing to keep in mind. It is week 14, and I still think that the Falcons will be contending with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So it's going to be a game that they can't just relax because in order to overtake the Bucs and win the division, that's going to be one of those games that they really need. So who is the quarterback? We don't know. A lot of things can happen at that time, but that would be a game where you can't rest your starters because you're still trying to think about seeding in the playoffs.
My last 2, Nick, I think are kind of the low-hanging fruit. I thought I'd get fun with, the first 2 games that I picked out, but
yeah,
if you Google best matchups of 2024, I couldn't leave these off because in week 12, you have the Brother Bowl, you have the Ravens at the Chargers, John Harbaugh going back to face Jim. Correct me if I'm wrong, the last time they faced off was the Super Bowl. Right?
Yep.
Right? So you also have the angle where, the brain trust of the Ravens and Joe Horitz, who was in Baltimore for 25 years under Ozzie Newsome, under Eric DeCosta in the scouting department, is now running the front office for the Chargers. You see Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, other Ravens type players that go over there. Jesse Minter, who left Baltimore to Michigan when Mike McDonald went to Baltimore. You just, obviously the brothers and their style of football, there's cross-pollination between these 2 teams that will show up on the football field. And then Lamar Jackson, his first playoff game in 2018 was a wild card loss to the Chargers where we were starting to see those flashes. We had debates. Flacco should be starting next year. Lamar Jackson went on to win the MVP. So I just think that while it may not be as high scoring as the Falcons and the Vikings come week 14, Nick, I'd like to see a lot of fireworks and maybe the most rushing yards in a single game this season.
You think the most rushing yards in a single season will come in that game?
Yeah. Between what Jim Harbaugh wants to do with that offense and the combination of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry against that Chargers defensive front.
I can see that. That is a very interesting matchup. And anytime you are competing against a sibling, whether as kids or adults, it definitely makes things that much more interesting because the last time I think John beat Jim in the Super Bowl. So I don't think this is going to change that particular outcome because it's not way the same. It's not the Super Bowl, but beating your brother and being able to stick it to him, yeah, you would definitely like to do that. But once again, it goes back to who has a better team. It's like, do you believe in Lamar or do you believe more in Justin Herbert?
Right.
Well, I believe in a combo of Lamar and Derrick Henry to a point where you don't really have to have a high scoring game. You can win a game like 13-10, and the Ravens have those capabilities.
Jim Harbaugh is just like salivating at the thought of a 13-10 football game against his brother. You know what I mean? Like that is a dream for his, I'm sure. And obviously with where the Chargers are in their rebuild compared to the Ravens, just coming off an AFC championship appearance, I think like we've seen in the NBA playoffs, that's a tease for Nick before we split.
Mm-hmm.
Jim may want to drag his big brother down into the muck of, how the Chargers are going to play football. And my last one, again, with the low-hanging fruit, Merry Christmas, Netflix. You give us the Chiefs and the Steelers, but my matchup, again, back-to-back with the Ravens. Week 17, Ravens at Texans. Just a piece of how the Ravens, we talked about the Steelers the last episode, they have 6 division games plus the Eagles and the Chiefs to close out the year. Well, after the Ravens go on by week 14, they're at the Giants, at home against the Steelers, at Houston on Christmas Day, and they wrap things up against Cleveland. But this Texans matchup, CJ Stroud, Lamar Jackson, the AFC divisional round rematch when the Texans just got by Cleveland in the wild card, and then they found out what it was like to go up against a consistent perennial playoff type of team. Tank Dell coming back off of injury, the addition of Stephon Diggs, plus the additions of, a healthy offensive line for once, Joe Mixon in that backfield. I think the Texans have the type of punch to at least stay in a scoring contest with the Ravens, given all the departures on the defensive side of the football, including Mike McDonald. The Texans might be able to punch the Ravens in the mouth here just before we get to the postseason. So again, a rematch of the playoffs and the penultimate week of the regular season, we could be jockeying for maybe the number 1 seed in the AFC between these two teams.
You know what? That is a very intriguing, matchup. Lamar Jackson, he's been an MVP in the league twice. CJ Stroud, who was in that conversation and played sensational in his first year. The way that I look at this, thinking about my time in San Francisco and knowing this Bobby Slogan is their offensive coordinator, he now has a do-everything type of versatile running back in Joe Mixon. And this is going to be a run fest. And I know these are the type of games that Joe, he's used to playing against, the Baltimore Ravens as a former the Cincinnati Bengals. So this is going to be a game of which team has the ball the last and which team runs the ball the best. And if you look at what the Texans have done on the defensive side of the ball, Will Anderson was impressive as a rookie last year, but they've added some other guys opposite him that's sure to make that front seven.
Yeah, Daniil Hunter there.
Yeah.
Replacing Jonathan Greenard. That's right.
Run against. So they've gotten athletic, more talented, more aggressive on that defensive side of the ball for the Texans. And it looks similar. Like if you put each roster side by side, it looks like both of these rosters kind of are mirror images of one another, because the idea is getting after the pass rusher. Getting after the quarterback with your pass rushers, but also having that physical nature, like always punching someone in the face. That's kind of the idea that both teams want to have. So once again, I dare say it again, we know defense wins championships, but that could be the theme of this season for so many teams, because last season, a lot of teams struggling scoring points in the red zone. And when you build your defense, it makes it really tough.
Well, I just thought it was kind of funny seeing the defensive additions that they made. Certainly, I mentioned Hunter, Danico Autry on the defensive line, but they're collecting bust top 10 cornerbacks in Houston like they were infinity stones on Thanos' gauntlet, because of course they dropped.
You talking about Jeff Okudah?
I'm talking about Jeff Okudah and CJ Henderson joining Derek Stingley, who was outstanding as the 3rd overall pick. And like Lonnie Johnson was a high 2nd round selection. They're just stacking these, incredible athletes that may have flashed in college and just it didn't work out in Jacksonville or Detroit in the case of Okudah. They're rolling the dice on these incredible athletes that hopefully can give them quality corner play, which was a huge issue for them, the Texans, that is, this past season. So, Nick, you've got one more matchup that you're looking forward to on the 2024
Well,
season.
before we get that, I'll say,
okay.
Even though what you're saying is true, you have former first rounders, second rounders being pulled in by the Texans. The idea is that if you make your pass rushers that much more superior, we talk Danielle Hunter and we talk about Will Anderson, it's going to make everything lovely in the back end because the quarterback's not going to have that much time. He's got to get rid of the ball. So
yes.
you can get the best out of those guys with a better pass rush.
Yeah, exactly. Making life easier.
Yes.
Making our last matchup, Nick.
All right, last matchup, week 4. We're talking about the Vikings versus the Packers division matchup. You have Aaron Jones playing against his former team, and every guy wants to play well against his former team. And going back to Kevin O'Connell and what he wants to do with his running back, you got a dynamic guy. I mean, you go back to watching Aaron Jones play against the Cowboys in the playoffs, playing against the 49ers in the playoffs, still showing as though he's got that burst and explosion. Now, you add that with some superiority at the tight end position, the 2 wide receivers, that opens up everything, creates a lot of space. So it's going to be great to see how Aaron Jones responds to playing his former employer, who told him at the last minute, you know what? We're going to take on Josh Jacobs and we're going to send you out the door.
So to wrap things up, Nick Ferguson's 4 games that he has circled on the 2024 season. Week 4, Packers, Vikings. Week 7, Giants, Eagles. Week 8, the battle of the top 2 picks, Chicago, Washington. Week 14, Atlanta and Minnesota, the Kirk Cousins game. On my end, week 2, you've got the 49ers, Vikings. You've got the Cowboys and Steelers on Sunday night, week 5, the Brother Bowl, Ravens, Chargers, week 12, and week 17, you've got the Ravens and the Texans. Nick, before we split, I mentioned the NBA playoffs, and I wanted to talk about just the type of performances, right? We've seen, whether it's my Boston Celtics or your Denver Nuggets, is there some way to translate, let's say, as a Denver Broncos football player watching Nikola Jokic in the playoffs? Is there a way to understand the heart of a champion on the hardwood and have that translate to a team in the Denver Broncos that have those type of aspirations? Meanwhile, in New England, or you talk about, the New York Knicks with their 2, football teams, how can you watch success in another sport and try to translate it to winning in your program?
Well, the idea is taking a page out of Nikola Jokic's book where you just said, I don't give a damn, right? I don't care what people say about me as being a 3-time MVP of the league. And, he doesn't have the foot quickness. He doesn't have that, I guess, gravitas that we used to seeing centers of the past have. But guess what? He's not going to allow people to slow him down. He's big. He's hard to get around. He's got a mid-range game. He's the type of center that even Shaq, if he was honest with himself, would admit, you know what? When I grow up, I want to be Nikola Jokic, right? Because he has an all-around game. That's what you do. You look at other guys and say, well, how can I bring that type of tenacity to my particular sport and don't really give a damn what people in the media or the fans actually think about?
He's Nick Ferguson. I'm Alex Hardy. We are those guys. We hope to continue to be your guys throughout the 2024 season. We've got 2 episodes now, deep dive on the calendar release with the NFL schedule. So you can check either of those episodes, this one right here, which you just finished, or our most previous one when the schedule first came out, kind of a bigger picture look at things, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube. And we're going to continue keeping you updated throughout the course of this offseason. Times may be appearing slow, but that's never the case when you're working with a former 10-year NFL veteran and Nick Ferguson. So my guy, Nick, what do you have to say for the people on our way out?
Hey, remember, don't eat before you swim.
That's it?
That's it.
Like at all?
Yeah, I mean, you're not supposed to eat.
Usually cramp only after half an hour. Can you take a
bite?
Man,
you don't want to eat before you swim, man. You catch a cramp and you drown. That's why you don't eat before you swim.
Because you'll drown.
Yes.